Hello and welcome to another edition of the Homeschool Educational Supplement that we know as Interesting Stuff. And today we are going to dive into something that we've looked at a little bit before, which is the life of the Romans. And the reason why we're looking at it again is because there's so much there and it was just so cool. So let's jump into today's topic, which is the Roman Empire. And you might have noticed that I'm losing my voice because I've been doing too much talking recently, but we'll persevere. And so we all know something about the Romans, but let's cover the basics. That the Roman Empire was the post-Republican period of ancient Rome. It was a political entity that included large territorial holdings around the Mediterranean Sea in Europe, Northern Africa, and Western Asia. Of course, it was ruled by emperors from the accession of Caesar Augustus to the military anarchy of the 3rd century. It was a principate with Italy as metropole of the provinces and the city of Rome as the sole capital. And even today, hundreds, thousands of years later, we're still standing on the shoulders of these giants of history and the systems of society that they created. Basically, they were epic engineers. They were brilliant at designing, building, and inventing things. And they may have copied their ideas from earlier civilizations like the ancient Greeks, but they always added in their own new original bits as well. And so one classic example of this is stone arches. The arch was a foundational principle of Roman building and engineering. Now, simple stone arches already existed. People used them for hundreds of years to make stone bridges and doorways. But the Romans realized that they could change the design and use them for a lot more things. They added them to the tops of columns to make giant arches. They used them in grand gateways and memorials. And more importantly, they were used in bridges and aqueducts. Furthermore, there were even whole buildings made up completely of arches, like the Colosseum in Rome, which was an enormous amphitheater, which was round and open air. And to give the building some perspective, you have to understand that it was bigger than a football pitch, as high as a 16-story building, and could hold up to 50,000 people. But not satisfied with using arches just here, they also used the arches to build domes. And to do this, they needed another great Roman invention, which was concrete. And the Roman version was super strong and contained volcanic rock and ash. And the dome shapes were used to cover ceilings and the tops of their temples. Their architects were always pushing the limits of what was possible at the time. And it was generally said that Roman buildings should contain 3 fundamental qualities. That was strength, usefulness, and beauty. And you can't really argue with all 3 of those things being very important. Now, if you're going to have buildings, then you're going to need a way to get to those buildings. And the Romans were also famous for their roads. And so to help the Romans conquer new areas and get around their empire faster, the Romans built hundreds of thousands of roads, which were extremely practical, as before the Romans, most roads were just muddy tracks that vehicles and people would just sink into. But the Roman roads were not just simple. They were high-tech and they were built to last with layers of stone and sand, topped with flat paving slabs. And not only that, they also had curbs at the side to hold the road in place. And the roads usually had a curved shape or camber to let the water drain off the sides. In all, the Romans built more than 80,000 kilometers of stone-paved roads. That's enough to reach twice around the world. And you might also have heard that the Roman roads were famous for being as straight as possible. But why did they do this? Well, there's basically 3 reasons. That a straight line is the quickest way from A to B, that it uses up the smallest amount of materials, and that you can see what lies ahead. So an ambushing army, for example, can't hide around the corner. And it's also a fact that many of the roads that we use today follow the same path that the Romans chose thousands of years ago. Now, all this work that the Romans were doing meant that very often they ended up being very dirty and very grubby at the end of the day. And the Romans were very big on keeping clean. They had public baths and laundries and toilets and fountains and drains to carry away wastewater. But all of these things needed a supply of fresh running water, which led to the invention and building of huge aqueducts. These buildings were engineering masterpieces that were basically channels that carried water into a city from a mountain spring or a reservoir. It was sometimes made by damming a river out in the countryside. The water itself served all kinds of purposes, one of which was to fuel the public baths, which were an essential part of Roman social life. Romans went there not only to get clean, but also to meet friends, chat, gossip, and conduct business. The water carried by the aqueducts was also vital for local sanitation. The Romans shared communal toilets, which were basically long benches with holes cut into them above channels of flowing water. The holes were usually only about 50 to 60 centimeters apart, so you'd get pretty close and pretty cozy with your neighbors. Crazily enough, it's actually thought that explosive gases might have sometimes flared up from Roman toilets. This is ridiculous, isn't it? Caused by methane buildup in the sewers underneath. Yep. Best not to light a fire in there, I suppose. In addition to that, the Romans didn't actually have toilet paper. Instead, they used a sponge attached to a stick called a tersorium. They would dip the sponge into a shallow channel of running water and then push it through a narrow slit at the front end of the bench to wipe themselves. Sometimes also sponges were kept in a bucket filled with salt water and vinegar, which can kill some bacteria and viruses. Sponges, however, were mainly used by the upper class people. The lower classes had to use small stones or bits of broken pottery to clean themselves. Ouch. At home, the Romans had pots that they would wee into. They emptied the pots into larger urine jars in the street. These were collected and the urine was used to wash clothes. They had to leave the urine for a few days until it broke down into a chemical called ammonia, which is surprisingly still used today in many modern cleaning products. Houses also had private toilets for poo, which were usually in the kitchen, which meant they could also be used to dispose of food scraps. People flushed these toilets with buckets of water, and when the pits filled up, they would need to be emptied. Oh, that would be a rough task. Are you feeling happy that you live in the modern world yet? Life was pretty tough for some of these people in the past. Oh, here's another little fact. Yeah, the Roman toilets didn't actually have S-shaped bends like the modern toilets have, which meant there was basically nothing to keep out the flies and the rats and the smells. Ooh, that's a tough one. So the Romans were brilliant builders and great inventors. But they also offered us so much more than just roads and bridges. Before the Romans, there was no reading and writing in Britain. And so when they invaded, they also brought with them schools. Fast food might seem like a modern invention, but the Romans were also big fans of it as well. They often bought hot food from a thermopolium, an ancient takeaway restaurant. It's thought by scientists that rabbits, which were only native to Spain and France, were actually brought into Britain by the Romans. Although I'm not quite sure what purpose that would be for, but maybe it had one. Perhaps they just liked the creatures. They can be very cute. But it was not only rabbits that they brought. There's also evidence that they introduced stinging nettles to Britain as well. Apparently, the Romans are said to have used the stinging nettles to beat themselves with to relieve pain in their joints, which might sound like a rather strange thing to do, but apparently it worked. And there's more. The Romans apparently invented the first locks. They were the first people to use pivoted scissors, like the X-shaped ones that we use today. And they might even have been involved in recycling the rubbish, which appears to have been piled up outside of cities, then collected, sorted, and reused as building materials. And the list goes on and on and on of all the things the Romans did. Did you know they introduced us to a lot of the fruit and vegetables that we eat today? Things like apples, pears, cherries, grapes, plums, carrots, celery, cucumbers, and turnips, as well as a lot of herbs and spices, were transported around their empire and introduced in many different places. And also, after the schools were set up and people could read, they needed something to read. And so they were also responsible for the first newspapers, which contained information about daily events. Copies were carved on stone or metal and distributed around towns. This included news about contests, notable marriages, deaths, military obligations, and other astrological omens. The inventions go on and on and on, but perhaps one of the most important elements that the Romans left behind was the wonder of language. The Romans spoke an old form of Latin, and as their empire spread, so did the Roman words. In fact, lots of English words today are based on the Latin that the Romans used. A couple of examples that you might recognize: aqua, meaning water; noctis, meaning night; luna, meaning moon; liber, meaning book, but also meaning child and free as well; ignis, meaning fire; and canis, meaning dog. And there might even be a few more that you're able to recognize or that you know yourself. And strangely enough, even though the Romans had a functional language and alphabet, they apparently still didn't have the number 0, which has always puzzled me. But then maybe I just get easily puzzled. Anyhow, hopefully you can see how the society that we have today was built on all the hard work done by the Romans in the past. But their empire did not last forever. The first 2 centuries of the empire saw a period of unprecedented stability and prosperity, known as the Pax Romana, or the Roman peace. Rome reached its greatest territorial expanse during the reign of Trajan, which was around 100 years AD, or after Christ. Following this, a period of increasing trouble and decline began with the reign of Commodus about 100 years later. And in the 3rd century, the empire underwent a crisis that threatened its whole existence as the Gallic Empire broke away from the Roman state and a series of short-lived emperors failed to secure local territories. Finally, there were large invasions by Germanic peoples, and the Roman Empire collapsed. And that, as they say, was that. So I hope there was something interesting or unusual in today's presentation. If you'd like a different topic, let me know and I'll see if I can cover it for you. As usual, under the video you will find some comprehension questions to help you check your understanding. So wherever you are, whatever you're doing, I wish you a fantastic day and I'll speak to you again soon. Take care.